Well, thank you very much for coming here today. It's going to be great to talk to you about what we do and some very relevant topics, I think, which is, I guess, why you're here. So I won't waste much time, we'll get started. So I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 key areas, really. The first one is speeding up the enterprise, and I don't think that's a new topic or a new need to any of you. You know that's got to happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about the path to SAP DevOps and some ways to actually get there from where you may be today. We're going to talk about automating SAP change control very briefly, because that's one of the key components of that particular path. And then we're going to talk about perhaps the next steps, which is what we call DevOps orchestration. So let's get into it and see where we go. So we all know there is a need to speed up the back end of the enterprise. We've got the back end, the enterprise, it's the core, it's the systems of record. We've got to govern that really well. Change is slow, it's Neolithic. But we've got the front-end applications, the customer experience ones, internal and external, and these changes happen at lightning speed. And so what we find is that we've got a little bit of a mismatch here, and so companies and analysts have been trying to find ways to explain how best to deal with this over some time. And so initially it began with the Boston Consulting Group back in 2012. They said you actually need to do this with a 2-speed IT method. So the front end one's at 1 speed, they decouple the back end at another. So McKinsey said the same in 2014, and more recently Gartner have released their bimodal IT particular method of doing it as well. However, things have actually changed. The Boston Consulting Group, the same 2 guys who spoke about 2-speed IT, have written a new paper calling the end of 2-speed IT, saying at best it could have only ever been an interim solution. It's not something that you can run with into the future. Bain & Company said the 2-speed IT model is off track, and Forrester have been a little bit more aggressive and said the false promise of bimodal IT, and directly talking to the Gartner proposal as well. So we have here to see some ideas now that what began as a way of dealing with this is now no longer useful. It's very interesting. This is now creating what I call the pressure gap in the the SAP IT support area. We ran a webinar recently that was very well attended, and I asked them 2 questions. I said, to what degree is your organisation under pressure to speed up? And out of that, we had about 83% said we're under pressure to do things faster. So I asked another question. I said, well, to what extent is your organisation implementing Agile or CI/CD to do something about it? Only 9% said they're doing something significant, 36% they're doing nothing at all. Now, if we actually look at that and we combine that with the idea that in 3 to 5 years, analysts are saying that the business is going to own more than 50% of the applications, we can see that the SAP IT teams are going to have to find ways to rethink how they're doing things. They're going to have to find ways to speed up. It's just how it is. And so some kind of CI/CD or Agile or DevOps type development program is going to need to be implemented in the SAP IT support area in order for the business to actually be satisfied with what's going on. You may or may not be aware, but analysts tell us that the difference between the value that the business believes that IT provide them and the value that IT believe they provide the business is a 20% gap. So if you combine that with the other facts, then one could say that, in fact, someone at a booth yesterday said that it's not a comfortable place to be in IT at the moment, particularly managing SAP infrastructure because of these pressures. But I guess what I'm saying today is there's things you can do about these pressures to actually begin to satisfy the business a little better. So there's a path to DevOps. So DevOps, most people agree, is, and a lot of people have got different ideas of what DevOps actually means. Everything from development and operations having cups of coffee together, through to development and operations collaborating together on developments and so on. But basically what it means is that we're actually moving to a way of managing change better and faster. The goal is to get workable software into the development systems for businesses to use sooner rather than later. The day of the big project landing in 6 months' time is gone. They won't deal with that anymore because of the hypercare, the instability, the competitive nature and so on. So how do we get there? First step, number one, is to need to mature your change control processes. We deal with companies every day that manage changes in various ways, and you may or may not be surprised that the number of companies that don't have what we consider to be mature change processes are quite amazing, particularly when we're talking about managing the system of record, the critical applications in the business. The next step is to create multi-track delivery approach. SAP is never going to be a single speed IT system. So how do you do that? Well, you need to do that in multiple different ways. The third way is you're going to need to automate. You're not going to get to where you need to go without some kind of automation. So therefore that's the third step. The fourth step is begin to expand your agile DevOps development models. Everybody's doing something around this at the moment, but we're going to need to expand that to be able to deliver change to the business more effectively. Then the fifth step, which is not that far over the horizon, is what we call DevOps toolchain orchestration. That'll be the next step. That should be your goal, where you're aiming to achieve, and you don't get there until you've covered these off first. So a little bit on each of these at the moment. So you need to mature things. Now, you know, when you first implement SAP, you fit in this box here. You're unconsciously incompetent. You've got no idea. You're living in blissful ignorance. Very soon you end up being consciously incompetent. Oh, we've got to manage change. I don't really know how to do it. That doesn't last long. You then end up here, consciously competent, in which case you know how to manage change, but you're working very, very hard at being able to do it. And then finally, which if you follow the ideas that we're talking about, you can move towards becoming unconsciously competent, where things are automated, you know what's happening, and it just happens under the covers. It's a bit of a journey, but you get there as well. So, let's talk a little bit then about multi-track delivery methodologies here. Some call them multi-track or multi-path and so on, but basically we're used to delivering SAP change in this track. It's the project track, you know, 3, 6 monthly, 12 monthly releases and so on. So what we're suggesting is something like this, and we're seeing that forward-thinking SAP IT support teams are developing methodologies similar to this. You've got your business as usual or your emergency track. These are where changes need to be delivered into production immediately. Now that can take some time still, but it needs to happen immediately. We're then looking at finding ways. This is the fast track, the agile track, or the DevOps track, getting multiple changes into development really quickly. And different companies have different ways of occurring with this. Some say, well look, we're going to all develop here, we'll throw it in here, and then when the business is ready, they'll then deploy that to production. Now that's all well and good. You need tools to be able to do that effectively, because the business doesn't understand what's going to happen if that goes wrong, gets out of sequence and so on. Then there's a release track and a project track. In other words, we're looking more at a multi-speed IT delivery system here, and the idea really then is to find ways to move more and more change into this track. Some things will never get into this track, but there'll be others that you can put in other tracks as well. So we have a customer who developed this multi-track delivery process, and within 2 years they were able to increase the rate of change by over 650%. And that's just by simply changing the way they did things, organising their work in different methods. So those that required low testing could go through the fast track, those that required a little bit of extra testing could go through a slightly faster track, and then those that required significant testing, well, they had to go through the slower, more likely the release track. You're always going to have SAP projects, so there will be a project track. You can't implement a new module, for example, piece by piece. It's got to happen at once, and so you're going to have a project track in there as well. Automation becomes a really important part of this process, this path to DevOps. Without automation, it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve it. So why is that important? Well, firstly, we need to automate the workflow. Things happen quickly when you remove a lot of human element. For example, with our software, you can deliver an emergency change to production in less than 4 minutes. Now, you can't do that without automation. So this is what one needs to begin to think about doing. We then need to look at change control process enforcement. If we're going to manage changes down different tracks in different ways, and you can't enforce that, you know what's going to happen? The business will put pressure on the developer, on the basis guy, they'll pop it into the fast track, hasn't undergone the right testing, now it's in production, things have gone wrong. You need to enforce the processes. No enforcement could very well mean you don't have a process at all because you've got no guarantee that anyone's following it. Only becomes a problem really when the production system stops working or the auditor has a look at what went wrong and how it happened. And I guess you've all had that. Your auditors had a look at your transports and said, I've got no idea how this got here. How did it get here? So you need to be able to enforce your processes. We have a particular feature within our software called OOPS, Overtake and Overwrite Protection System. It was initially introduced to prevent parallel development. But these days you need to facilitate parallel development because we're running multiple changes down the fast track together and there is going to be parallel development occurring all the time. So you need to have a method of being able to make that visible and to be able to manage it and to be able to govern it. You need someone to know that parallel development is happening and you need someone in the know to be able to approve for that to take place. But then you need a software to be able to keep that visible so that you're able to understand the location of those parallel developments so you can control and manage them. If you don't have this in place, going to a fast track development system is going to become problematic for you, particularly if you're running an N+1 for example as well. You're going to need to have overwrite protection because if you have an N+1 particular environment, you might be running a BW upgrade and a sidecar, you're going to need to reapply those changes on a regular basis. And if you haven't got some automation in place to do that, it's going to be very, very expensive. We have one customer who was able to do a BW upgrade and a HANA database migration as well. They had to run a 3-month sidecar to be able to do that effectively, run them both in parallel for a while. They saved over 135 developer days through what we call auto retrofit. So these types of things are necessary if you're going to achieve your fast development, agile or DevOps goals. Now there are a number of different ways to achieve it, but basically it all boils down to making sure you've got the right processes in place, you've had some thinking about your multiple path delivery processes, and you have begun to automate as well. You need all these three working together or your path to DevOps is going to be a lot slower than you might like it to be. So as a part of this process, then beginning to introduce your DevOps methodologies. And most people are aware of what these are. We need to move things. If we're going to push more into our fast track, there are things we're going to need to do earlier in the process. We're going to need to do things like in-process code reviews. And you can buy specialist tools to do that. Solution Manager has got some of those things in there. So you pick up your errors in QA, in development before they even get to QA. So you've got to move those things. So if you can do those, that's going to be better. In-process impact analysis. If you can do that, then you might be able to change the way you develop and move it into the fast track rather than the slower, extensive testing track. And there are ways you can do that too. In-process testing as well, to be able to test as you're moving along, so you can pick up errors earlier, make code changes earlier, so you can move things through. Remember, the goal is to create development so we can move down the fast track as often as we can. If we can't move them down the fast track, they're going to have to go down the slower track, more testing is required, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, business a little less satisfied as well. So if we can reduce the testing requirements, reduce the amount of effort in QA, we're going to get our changes accelerated to production as a matter of course. The next step we look at is what we call DevOps orchestration. Now we find many people have an ITSM system of record. We have our SAP change control automation platform. We have got various other automated tools along here. The problem is they're not orchestrated. They have no visibility between one another, and therefore you're relying on individuals to do the right thing at the right time. What we suggest is a complete orchestrated process. So where your change control platform is integrated with your ITSM system of record, it automatically kicks off your code review, your various other assessments, your testing and so on, so that in the whole process it goes through. So the vision really is that we start here, we've got a system, we need to make a change. As we're developing, we're doing our code inspection, we're continuing developing, we look at our impact assessment, continually developing, we're looking at our automated change and automated testing here, and then as these things come through with green lights, we now move through to production. So this is really where the goal is to actually end up, but you're not going to get there until we've done the other things first. Because without a platform of change in place, it's going to be very difficult to achieve. Now, can it be done? Yes, it can be done. These are some of the applications that have been integrated with our software, which is a workflow change control automation platform. And so no one's done all of them, but someone's done some of them. So as you can see, it's certainly possible to begin to integrate third-party ALM applications to create a true DevOps tool chain. Is it valuable? It's absolutely valuable. By replacing manual systems with automation, you will reduce costs and you will accelerate change. So we also need to consider our infrastructures. Now SUSE have got some great servers and applications and methods to actually help you to be able to do that, as you need to look at changing your infrastructure, changing your server methodologies and so on as well. Gartner have had some things to say about this as well. They've said that really a lack of thought towards a DevOps toolchain architecture is going to limit your ability to progress down this path rapidly. So you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to collaborate, so you can have organisations that collaborate, but without tool collaboration we've only got half the picture as well. So we need to be able to find ways to do that. So they suggest that you do need a tool strategy. So yes, we're a change control automation platform provider, so we're part of it, but there are others. You need to think about automated testing, automated impact analysis, automated code review, so on and so forth, to enable you to develop your tool chain. You then need to have a look at how you're going to provide interoperability between those tools. They need to talk to each other, and they're not going to talk to each other this way. They're going to need to talk to each other through some kind of automation platform, which is something that we provide at Revelation Software. So in summary, SAP IT teams are going to need to find ways to speed up. You're going to need to rethink about how you're managing change, and maybe even some of the tool sets you've invested in heavily today, they may be limiting to you. DevOps and CI/CD is a methodology to get there and needs to also be considered as well. You need to follow a process towards DevOps toolchain orchestration, and then finally Gartner advises you to consider tools that can actually integrate between one another as well. Now I don't know that we've got time for questions, so I thought I'd show you where we are so you can come and see us if you want to ask a few questions. So you go down the road and turn left and we'll be just down there as well. So
awesome.
That's us. So thank you for your time. If you've got questions, ask me later on.
Let's give it up for Rick Porter.